Good evening and welcome to meeting number 909 of the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston. We welcome you all here. We have a guest speaker, Alan Hirschfeld, who's ready to talk to us tonight about the worst, best telescope. I think that's the name of the talk.
It's the best work.
Best worst. And we'll start with our board meeting. Now tonight's refreshments, Tom is doing that. And you notice I don't have Tom's picture there, but I think if you picture Tom with a mustache, that'd be a dead ringer. So that's why we didn't make any changes. And we'll have the Secretary's report from Phil Levine.
Summary of the ATMoB meeting held April 12, 2018 at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics here in the Phillips Auditorium. Club President Glenn Chappell called the meeting to order at 8 p.m. Various club members presented reports and committee summaries. Please see Starfields for details. Announcement: Glenn Chappell updated the membership about Astronomy Day, which was held April 21 at MIT Haystack in Westford. John Sheff informed the membership about the Cambridge Science Festival held April 12 through 22nd. Aaron Slisky mentioned an SG4 autoguider was donated to ATMoB from the Smithsonian. Kelly Beatty informed the membership about a planned Sky and Telescope 2019 total solar eclipse trip and announced he will be semi-retiring from Sky and Telescope magazine after 43 years. Glenn Chappell discussed Astronomy on Tap, organized by MIT postdoctorate candidates, which holds periodic astronomy events in the Boston area. Bruce Berger and Kelly Beatty informed the membership about 2 star parties to be held in Maine later this summer. Mario Mata updated the membership regarding the dark sky bill in the Massachusetts legislature and updated the membership about an LED lighting conference which was held in California, where he debated 3K versus 4K LED lighting. Glenn Chappell informed the membership about a video produced by BU student Meredith Lumore regarding ATMoB. Old business none, new business none. Glenn Chappell introduced the guest speaker for the evening, Dr. Mark Reed. His talk was entitled Mapping the Milky Way Sky. For further details on his talk, please refer to Starfields. Glenn Chappell adjourned the meeting at 9:45 p.m.
Observing Committee report. Again, I shortened this up quite a bit because we do want to keep the board meetings as brief as possible and still get the information out. The only thing I have is just a quick summary of the LVAS report. And the object for this month is NGC 4236. It's a barred spiral galaxy in Draco. Has anybody here seen it yet? Because I know Roger Ibis has been already putting out a lot of stuff about that. You've taken a picture and photograph too, so.
But he hasn't seen it.
Oh.
I did about 5 years ago.
You know, you're right. Mario, have you ever seen a Messier object?
Yes.
Astrophotography counts. Anyway, it's a fairly bright galaxy of magnitude 9.7, but it's large, so it's going to be kind of a difficult target. So when you get a chance, give it a shot. And it is in the newsletter, even though I don't have the slide here. Yes, we have a question or comment in the back.
Yeah, John Bishop and I actually looked at it Tuesday night.
Okay.
And Draco, and it's extremely low surface brightness.
Yeah.
It is a large galaxy, but it just kind of blends with the background gray. So it's really tough, and that was with an 18.
Now, is that a face-on? Is it kind of edge?
Primarily.
Okay, so it's slightly, maybe like the Andromeda
Slightly,
Galaxy
yeah.
type of thing. Okay. Well, anyway, give it a shot. And again, as always, I appreciate the involvement this club has been in with the LVAS program. Their numbers have been kind of dwindling, and all of a sudden this club came along. We have 7 or 8 every month that file reports for that, so you're always welcome to give it a shot yourself. Clubhouse Committee report with Steve.
Okay, I'll make it brief. We had a work party on the 28th of April. Had a good turnout too. 28 volunteers all told. Did a lot of field work. One crew worked on the lower field, clearing out brushes and a lot of debris from the winter, which was very good. And then we had 6 or 7 people who worked for about 4 hours straight, doing a lot of driveway work, filling in potholes, spreading gravel, raking gravel from the lawn. This is an annual event we go through every year, but it looks very good. Potholes are finished. We removed the snow fence. I think it's safe to do that now. Thank you. So,
Last words.
Yeah. And we did some work on the new 25. As Eileen mentioned, we now own the telescope. Dave Proughton fabricated a nice 3/4-inch Baltic plywood box mount for a new moonlight focuser and installed it. And I just ordered a new shroud for it, which we should have for the next work party. And the telescope is up and ready to go. It's been cleaned, it's collimated, so for anybody who would like to use it and learn how to use it, let me know. I'd be happy to show you. It's ours. And we also did a little sanding and varnishing on that telescope. It had been sitting there for a number of years, so it was starting to wear. So we spiffed it up a bit. So we'll do a little more next month as well. We also had some telescopes for the surplus auction that you're going to hear about from Maria Batista. We have one here tonight, in fact. And you know to go onto the website, log in, and you go under members, and you'll see the status of the telescopes that are being auctioned off. I have a bid. Do I? 250, the man in the front. No?
Suggestion for
Yeah.
having to re-illuminize a 25-inch mirror.
Mm-hmm.
It's worked great for me. Use a one of those pipe heaters in wintertime.
Yeah.
Okay, and in summertime, they only cost like $40. One of these small dehumidifiers, they make an enclosure for it.
Yeah, that's the rough trying to make a
Yeah, and
enclosure for it.
as long as the dust doesn't, there's always going to be dust,
Mm.
but if it doesn't get moist, it doesn't stick to the coating.
Right, it doesn't adhere to it. Right, yeah. We can actually cover the front surface. The back surface just has fabric with Velcro, so we'd have to put something
Yeah,
in.
you got to put something in.
Right, that's the problem.
I strongly advise it because otherwise it's expensive to.
$900 is what I paid the last time. to do
Right.
it. And that was 4 years ago. But the heat is working. The mirror is dry. It's staying in good shape so far, but I know what you mean. We will have to do it again at some point. We'll be passing the hat for that one someday. So thanks again for the lunch crew. We have a lot of help, helping cooking out and cleaning up on our Saturday work parties. It's been very good. And we'll get together again on the 26th, which I believe is Memorial Day weekend, Saturday the 26th. And we need help mowing the lawn. We may not have John Blomquist to help us with his big tractor mower. I don't know. And in fact, if anybody has a power mower they're thinking of discarding that's still in good shape, we might be interested in taking it off your hands. We have two that are working now, one not so good, one okay, but we could really use three. 3 power mowers would be good. We could do the lawn ourselves. So we have about 1.5 acres to mow. It's quite a bit. Okay, that's it.
I was just thinking, I pulled out a couple of the stakes there for the snow fence, and I wasn't sure again with the hard thing if I should be doing it, but Paul Cachetti was there, so I guess he would step in if I needed CPR, and then I had this horrible thought, if the defibrillator doesn't work and I pass out, and then I just happened to open my eyes up, and there's Paul coming toward me. There's a massive heart attack. Nothing's going to save me. Telescope making. Now, I haven't got any notes. Anybody have any updates on the telescope making? What's going on at the clubhouse right now?
I can give a quick
Sure.
update. So I purchased 6 8-inch mirrors, blanks I should say. They are back ordered. We should get them in about 6 weeks or so. So if members are interested in generating some mirrors, it's going to be a little wait. We'll also need to get some plate glass for blanks or investigate some other options for that. So we're working on that. We have everything else, grits and the whole bit. So we're in pretty good shape. It's just a slight delay, and I called a couple of different places. So if anyone else knows of providers of glass, just reach out to me after so we don't go too long.
I've got some 8-inch plate glass things that you can have.
Oh, that'd be awesome. That'd be a great donation to the club. So just grab me if you know of any place else to look at. I've looked at 2 places that are local, and they're just, and it's very expensive. The price of glass has gone up a lot. I think the price I did get was $107 for an 8-inch. So, but it's definitely worth it.
Thank you, Tom. By the way, I'd be looking for somebody that could give a report for telescope making. Again, we just added this to our business report because it's nice to know what's going on, but there's only a handful of people that actually do the telescope making. It doesn't mean they have to come and do the reports all the time. So I'll probably put something out. If there's anybody that's a regular attendee here that could get in touch with Mike or somebody else that does a telescope making, just get a little of an update. How's Julie doing with her telescope? Does anybody know? Is she still
Just fine, so just go ahead and continue to polish.
Okay, because as soon as she finishes her project, we want to know a little bit more about it. But it'll be the same for the observing committee. I'll talk to Bruce. We'll see if we can get somebody to formally make the announcements for the observing committee. Outreach committee, Rich Nugent.
All right, come on, Bob.
Oh,
We'll come up real fast. So good evening, everybody. I'll keep this really brief. So we, you can read the newsletter just as much as I can spout off. One of the things that didn't get into the newsletter as far as the April 22nd event here was Phil Levine was out here for about 5 hours with the solar telescopes during the afternoon. And Phil, you said there was quite a crowd? Phil? Quite a crowd on the 22nd?
Oh, yeah, good show. A lot of people showed up.
I'll get that in the newsletter next time. I was at NEAF and was talking with Kelly Beatty from Sky and Telescope. He's got quite a few ideas that we might want to pursue as an organization with outreach. But John and I are part of, John's on the committee, he's one of the Star Party organizers. I don't see Laura here tonight. I don't know if Bernie's here. Is Bernie here?
No.
Okay. You want to talk about what's going to happen on the 17th?
Sure, absolutely. Just so you're aware, there's an upcoming Star Party just basically negotiated in the last couple of days. This will be at the Fay School in Southborough, Massachusetts. Tim McCauley is the science department chair there and inquired if we could put on a Star Party for the school. And after some back and forth, we agreed on May 17th. We actually haven't set a time, but presumably it'll be 45 minutes to an hour after sunset. Not sure we can keep third graders out too much later than that. But figure, 8:45, getting more details to come around when we have them.
Yeah, we'll throw out an announce notification. And if you can help out, that'd be great. And going forward, if the club wants to do a lot of outreach or more outreach, we're gonna need some help with volunteers to do that. So we'll get more information out this summer for where we might want to go, and so we'll let you know. And anything you can do to help out would be greatly appreciated. Outreach is a blast. Star parties are so much fun. And if you've never done one before, just please come on and try one. They're easy. Bring a little telescope. It doesn't have to be a monster expensive telescope, just a little scope. And we'll get you all set up and you can help out. It'll be fun. Great. Anything else? That's good.
That's it.
All right, that's good. Thank you.
yeah, I'll add to what he said. Star parties are a lot of fun. They're very rewarding. Haystack, we did a astronomy day thing up there. I know Maria was there, Bob Toop was there. Anybody else that was at that star party?
Maria?
Okay, right, yes. I missed your name.
Corey Mooney?
Corey, and you were both there. Corey brought a whole bunch of binoculars, so it was a kind of a nice turnout. We're going to make that an annual event. They liked what we did there, so that'll be from now on an astronomy day, the spring version rather. We'll do something there. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or anything to add to the business report so far? Any of the committees? Announcements. Okay, I was just going to go back for a second. We're talking about star parties, and just like I mentioned, it's really good to bring a small telescope to a star party. And what I've been doing in the past couple of years, especially if it's an older group, is I'll bring an Orion 4.5 inch. It's an f8 reflector. Very user-friendly, and I'll bring it to a star party. And when I start, I usually plan it definitely when the moon is in the sky, at least a 4-day-old moon up to about maybe a couple of days before full. And I'll train the telescope on the moon. I have a cell phone, and I'll show them how you can take a cell phone image of the moon with your own cell phone. And it is difficult. You got to find the sweet spot, and I make that clear to them. But then I just leave them up to it. They can aim. They can find the moon through the finder scope. There's no problem at all, and they just do their own. They'll come running up to me, showing me pictures they got, and I thought it was kind of neat to have an image of the moon you took when you'd never even used a telescope before. It's kind of an exciting thing for a newbie to do at these star parties. And it also brings out the message I always want, that you don't need a gazillion-dollar huge telescope to see these things. A small scope will do the job. That was my topic at the North Shore Club last week. I failed to acknowledge Rich. Roger Iverson was putting out a thing about what's the smallest scope you can see the companion to Polaris. What he was snickering about. Am I going to embarrass? It's the guy with the red face back there in the far corner. Unofficially, but we'll find out, he has the world record for the smallest scope ever used to see the companion. He stopped the 10-inch scope down to 40 millimeters and was able to see the companion. I told him I'm going home tonight making a 39 millimeter scope. So we'll keep this thing going. But congratulations. And then Mario has a little souvenir he'd like to display.
So, the test satellite was designed and built by MIT, a friend of mine, George Ricker. In fact, he's volunteered to come and give us a talk on it. I went down in March for a week. I delayed my vacation to be there for the launch. Of course, they delayed it a month. I then moved my office patients around because I had a VIP pass, and went down, waited 2 days, had to come back, and they launched it the next day. So for 2 trips to Florida, all I got is this VIP pass. So I'm wearing it tonight so I get some use out of it.
They didn't give you a t-shirt, huh?
I can say the satellite's working. They took a first test image last week of Omega Centauri, and he says it looks great. And it's still settling into its orbit. It won't be in its final orbit until another, I think, 6 weeks.
Okay, and Mario did talk about, we might be able to get
Yeah.
one of the people who worked on the test project give a talk maybe for September. So that'll start off Tom. You won't have to get a speaker right away. Anybody else have any announcements? Old business. I'm just going to bring up one thing. I know Bruce isn't here tonight, Eileen is here, but I know there was some talk about the pins. I know that's kind of on hold, which is okay. What is your thought? Well, do you think there'll be a pin available, say, in the fall?
Absolutely not. We can order.
Yeah, it's in the progress. We haven't forgotten about it, but it's still in the works. So, do you have any updates at all, or is it just kind of, we're still
I
waiting?
left it to Bruce to do.
Okay, and he's not here tonight, so we'll see how that goes.
Maybe I'll just-
Anybody have any new business to bring up? All right, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. I guess you guys can get set up. I'll read the bio. We welcome Alan Hirschfield here. Some of you are familiar with him, author of Parallax. And I'll read what we had here. Here's the remote, by the way. The 36-inch reflector of English amateur astronomer Andrew Common made its way from a London backyard to a Yorkshire estate and ultimately to a Mountaintop Observatory in California. This little-known telescope, built in 1879 and still operating today, revolutionized celestial photography and proved the 19th century astronomers that the future of cosmic discovery lay in the camera, not the human eye. Our speaker, Alan Hirshfield, is a professor of physics at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. We've been there for 40 years, he said. No plans on retiring. It's hard when you're a professor or something like that. And he says the students are getting more communicative, even in this era of cell phones and everything. He's very pleasantly surprised that they still get engaged. And he's associate of the Harvard College Observatory. He's the author of Parallax, The Race to Measure the Cosmos, The Electric Life of Michael Faraday, Eureka Man, The Life and Legacy of Archimedes, and most recently, Starlight Detectives, How Astronomers, Inventors, and Eccentrics Discovered the Modern Universe. He is a regular science book reviewer for the Wall Street Journal and has written about episodes in the history of science for many magazines. So I guess we'll still get them set up, but we'll welcome Alan Hirschfield to our meeting tonight. We will have copies of his books available. It's kind of a limited amount. I've already reserved. I know Maria's asked for copies of both Parallax and Starlight Discoveries, and I'm going to get one of the same. But if there's anybody that's interested, or if you brought a copy of your own to have him autographed, please feel free to see him right at the end of the talk. Alan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's a privilege to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The topic of star parties has come up, so I just want to mention something new that I've been doing at our star parties down at UMass Dartmouth. In addition to telescopes brought by the local amateur astronomers and our observatory telescope, I've been setting up a spectrum demonstration at night. Conditions are really good when it's dark, and it is easily done. You can buy from a science supply house for not much money gas discharge tubes, various gases, a high voltage supply that is designed to energize these things. And you can buy in bulk these little 2x2-inch diffraction gratings that you literally can just hand out at night. And they're cheap enough that if people walk off and want to do their own spectrum analyzing, it's not a great loss. But the guests, the visitors, really are amazed to see the spectrum, say, of hydrogen. These lines that are just floating in virtual reality, right, in the air there. And it gives me the opportunity to explain how it is that astronomers know about what stars are made of. So that's my suggestion. Now, I got interested in the development of modern astronomy. Okay, I've been interested in the history of astronomy for a long time, and I was wondering how it is that astronomy became a modern science. Up, down? Okay.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay, so everybody, I assume, can hear me. I can hear me. And I was interested in the transition of astronomy from an old visual science art to really something that is recognizably modern. And so that's basically the years from about 1840 into the 1920s. Turns out a lot happened. A lot of people were involved in bringing astronomy into the modern age. This is just a small percentage of all the people that were involved in this long story. Later on, when the talk's all over, I can put up the slide and you can see how many of these people you can identify. I did give a version of this talk to the Gloucester Area Astronomy Club, so I think, Mario, you're already familiar with it. So.
It was a good talk. I want to hear it again.
Okay, very good. With that endorsement, then I'll keep going. All right, so what was astronomy? Back in the 1840s, this was representative of astronomy that was being done at the time. Sure, there were reflector telescopes. Several of them were quite sizable. Certainly this one, this is Lord Rosse's 6-foot solid speculum metal reflector in Ireland, with which he saw the first spiral nebulae. Here's a drawing that he completed. Of course, it's a drawing because photography, while it had been introduced, was still in its infancy and could not be applied to astronomy in any meaningful way yet. Most astronomers used smaller, high-precision refractor telescopes. The stars were points of light. We could tell where they were located. We could tell, for some of them, where they were going, what they were made of, what physical processes were going on in them. Utter mystery. 1840s, we leap ahead then to the 1920s, and here, at least in my opinion, we arrive at a level of technology and physical understanding that is recognizably modern. Of course, the technology does seem crude by modern standards, but very advanced, certainly for the time. So that crude 6-foot diameter reflector turns into this marvelous 100-inch reflector on Mount Wilson. And of course, except in the beginning when they were just testing the scope, you didn't peer through the telescope. It was not for research purposes. You attached a camera, you took photographs, the photograph of M51, which bears, of course, a strong resemblance to what Ross drew many decades earlier. And equally important, if not more important, the spectrum, okay, which turned out to be the key to understanding the nature of stars and even the nature of the universe as we know. And when these two came together, advancements were sure to come, as we also know. So what I want to talk about today is more the photographic element of this advancement. Now, I don't know, I forget how many chapters there are in the book. I'm just going to focus on one particular chapter as representative of the advancement in our use of photography. But Agnes Clarke, the famous historian, 19th century historian, she wrote, "The camera is an encroaching instrument," very interesting wording, "so surely as it gains a foothold in any field of research, so surely it advances to occupy the whole, either as adjunct or principal." And that certainly was true with the camera being introduced to astronomy. We're going to focus on one telescope, one instrument that was key in introducing photography to professional astronomers. So this instrument, I know you're very, very knowledgeable about instruments. I don't know if this is a familiar looking instrument or not, but this is the one we're going to talk about. From backyard to mountaintop, the adventures of history's best, worst telescope. Very, very interesting instrument. So we begin with the owner of that instrument, Andrew Common in England. He was an amateur astronomer from a very young age, borrowed a small refractor telescope to do observing of the sky, but economic necessities meant he had to go to work. He joined his uncle's company, ascended through the company to become the head of the company, and eventually took an early retirement and returned to astronomy. So he initially again bought a small refractor telescope, and then he decided bigger was better. So here we are in the 1870s, 1880s. Refractors still had a fairly tarnished reputation, sometimes literally so. But there were telescope makers, refractor telescope makers, who made these commercial instruments. And George Calver was one of them, made 4,000 mirrors during his professional career. And of course, you don't necessarily train to be a telescope maker. You first become a shoemaker, and then you just take your skills over to telescope making. But here you see something that, this is 1877. I saw things like this in old magazines like Popular Mechanics or something, even in the 1930s. It's sort of your standard Newtonian telescope with a nice, hefty mount. And so he is the person who made Andrew Common's first telescope. Now I just want to introduce Andrew Common's neighborhood. Okay, this is the street that he lived in, Eaton Rise in West London, and this is a photo from 1910, and I'm sure it looked the same back in the 1880s or so. Maybe fewer leaves on the trees, but of course somebody said this whole area is half submerged by the fogs of London, so it was not a great observing site. But here we have Andrew Common's first telescope, first reflector telescope. This is an 18-inch diameter telescope made by Calver. And he installed it into his garden shed. You see, in the daytime, he was working on the garden, and at night, he's observing the heavens. A nice roll-off roof there. I have no idea what's going on in here, but there's no way to really find out what all that stuff is. But I showed you the neighborhood because this is his backyard. And it looked like a fairly wealthy neighborhood. And here's this guy in the Victorian age, and he's doing telescopes, telescopic observing at night. Must have been a little bit strange to his neighbors. Okay, so the first thing that he determined by using this telescope was that he wanted a bigger telescope. So he puts in the order for a 36-inch. Turned out to be 37, but he called it the 3-foot telescope. And here you can see the tube of the telescope. Much of it is hidden. Here's the 18-inch. So again, imagine you're one of the neighbors and you're looking, what is going on here? So I'm going to show you a diagram of the scope itself in a little bit, but you can see that you can make it horizontal and then there's a roll-on roof there. This whole structure was on rails so it could turn. But it was a Newtonian telescope, so you can see that observing at night was somewhat hazardous. F5.8 equatorial. And this is a view from his house, looking into his backyard, looking east. And I just want you to sort of notice the line of trees there. It looks like there might be some roadway back there. And I decided, hey, I wonder what's there. So I got his address, I found that, and looked it up on Google Maps. And here it is, 63 Eaton Rise. So the house no longer exists. It's I have no idea what it looked like, but I'm sure it looked better than what's there now. But this is basically the outline of that backyard, looking east here toward where the telescope presumably was. And here is this roadway that sort of arches, similar to what was seen in the previous photo. Layers of history. Okay, here's the scope. Now this has many, many strange features to it, certainly compared to modern reflector telescopes. Not surprisingly, it's heavy, okay, 9 tons. The mirror, okay, you can see it ahead of the deck axis. It's above the declination axis. And so normally you would put the reflector mirror behind the declination axis to balance the tube. But Common was of the opinion that he didn't want the optical path to be anywhere near any metal which might radiate heat. So this is what he did, but of course, to balance the tube, you have to provide a counterpoise, and so there were these boxes built into the telescope tube where you threw in weights. And the problem is, this thing is so long up to the eyepiece, if you attach an accessory up there, you're going to have to put in a lot of weight here. Typically 10 times the weight of whatever you attach to the eyepiece end. Not a one-person operation. It did use a mercury-filled polar axis casing. So there's a cylinder within this cylinder, and there is mercury in there on the theory that the Mercury would be able to lift much of the weight off the single bearing that this whole thing was sitting on down there at the bottom of the polar axis. A later user of this telescope called that whole Mercury flotation idea a delusion. It didn't work. It didn't work. Although I found out just today that the Mount Wilson 60-inch and the Mount Wilson 100-inch do use Mercury flotation bearings, and they do work, but this one did not work.
The Dunn Solar Telescope on Sacramento Peak, which is 300 feet long top to
Right.
bottom, is also floating the Mercury bearing up above.
Yeah, so it can be done, but it was not done. Yeah, right for this one. Calvert just made the mirror. Common did all the engineering. And I remind you, he was a sanitation engineer, not a mechanical engineer. It did have a clock drive, a gravity-driven descending weight, so there was a deep hole down through which the weight descended. So, all right, sounds good. But here's the innovation. Common wanted this telescope not for visual observing, but for newfangled astrophotography. And so here you see at the eyepiece end of the telescope is a camera mount. And he had a sliding plate holder. Okay, he could turn that with thumb screws. He had a guiding eyepiece so he could get a target star in the field of view. And in theory, well, in practice, move the plate to follow the star's motion. In theory, drive the telescope to likewise follow the star or celestial object. It didn't work. At least the latter did not work, and if you look at the mounting of this thing, it's no surprise. The drive could not keep an object centered for more than a few seconds. But this worked fine. So it gave him at least a few minutes of time exposure. And so what he would do is he would open up, line up the object, open up the shutter, follow for a few minutes this guiding star. When this got to the end of its travel, he shut the shutter, reset everything, lined it up again on the guiding star, reopened the shutter. And he would do that sequentially. A few minutes, a few more minutes, a few more minutes. And so, in some sense, I think that's sort of like Victorian era image stacking, when you're building up the overall image from a sequence of shorter exposure images.
Where is that located on the scope, on the previous slide?
Way up there, I don't really, it may be hidden by, I don't know what that thing is, but it's way up past that baffle that you see right there. I think literally at the top. So it's at the very, very upper end.
So there's no secondary.
Yeah, there's a diagonal somewhere up there. Everything from that baffle on upward actually could rotate. So the whole secondary and the camera attachment could rotate around. But you attach that camera mount and you got to throw some weights into here. So will it work? Will it fail? It worked. It worked incredibly well. Why did it work? Despite all these disadvantages, I mean, he had the fire. He wanted he would do anything to make this clumsy system work. And it was just a matter of time, patience, refinement. And so in 1883, which is not the first image of the Orion Nebula, I'll show that in a moment, he took this image of the Orion Nebula from this very poor observing site with that telescope. So just to, the 60-minute exposure, not all at once, of course, but in increments, to compare it with what had been done around the same time. So in the upper left is a drawing by Etienne Trouvelot, who used to be on staff here, and made wonderful drawings of celestial objects. They really look like art. And you can see, I mean, he's pretty good. That's pretty much what it looks like visually if you stare and stare and stare at it.
Is that for the 15-inch?
Yes, upper left there, that's through the 15-inch here, right across the way. And Henry Draper, of course, he is known for taking the first photograph of the Orion Nebula, and just a year earlier, really no comparison. This, I believe, this was a 51-minute exposure. There's another one that was shorter that shows even less than this, hardly shows any of the nebulosity. That, I think, was his second exposure.
That mirror, by the way, that took that is up in the dome,
Oh, really?
up next to the 15-inch. So the Draper mirror is up on display in the dome.
So was this, what's the diameter of that mirror? Is that
22 inch?
22? Yeah. So Andrew Common, he got the gold medal of the Royal Astronomical Society for taking that photograph, and he wrote, "Photography has now shown itself to be capable of giving us pictures of nebulae that are far superior to those made by eye and hand." This photograph showed stars that were not seen visually. So I think you can really follow what he is saying here. And then this next sentence is kind of interesting. "A library may now be made of pictures written on leaves of glass by the stars themselves," which is pretty cool. The advantage of photography, which again was very, very crude at this early stage, was objectivity. You didn't have an artist or an astronomer drawing what they were seeing or what they thought they were seeing. You had the light of the stars themselves making the exposure. So after this, Common decided, I need a bigger telescope. So he went, this one I think he did on his own. I think Calver might have gotten him the mirror blank, but he built the machinery to carve this thing 5 feet across. And he actually had it set up by the late 1880s. And he slaved away on this thing, trying to get it to work, and never really did. In order to pursue that goal, he sold his 36 inches, 3-foot telescope. And I'll just show you as an aside, the 5-foot telescope, that mirror and the telescope, made their way here to Cambridge, to Harvard. This was this common 60-inch reflector telescope that was here. And also very, very difficult to get this thing still to work. The mirror was not very, very good. And there were 2 of these mirrors, and they made their way to various other institutions and companies. And I think, is one of them still here?
No, it eventually became the start of what's now the 61-inch
Right.
out at Oak Ridge. And they wanted making a mirror for it.
Right.
And one of them went somewhere, maybe
One of them
south of the equator.
Yeah. Well, in any event, this is just an aside because Common left astronomy then, and he started making naval gun sights of all things for the Royal Navy. So we enter the next chapter of this 36-inch telescope. And he sold it to Edward Crossley, who, if it's possible, lived in an even worse observing location up in Yorkshire. He was a wealthy man by this time, and you can see that he built quite a nice setup for himself. Yeah, you like the dome. It's a nice dome with the disadvantage that it's made out of iron plate. So, 15 tons of dome. Okay? Asteroid. Can't penetrate. 15 and here you see a cross-section of the same telescope. So you can see much more clearly now. Up there, way at the top, there is the eyepiece, or where you would attach that camera mount. Now, in order to access that eyepiece, and you can see just pointed sort of middle angle, looks like 45 degrees or so, the observer is up 20 feet or so. And again, the hazard of using a big Newtonian like this at night. So Crossley developed a stair system that was actually linked to the dome, so that as the dome turned, the stair would rotate around with it, and therefore would always be near the telescope eyepiece end. So Crossley, he was not as dedicated as Andrew Common. He hired a full-time astronomer to actually use this, and he assisted that astronomer. But you read the records from this astronomer for hire, and he was practically in tears that this powerful telescope was under these cloudy Yorkshire skies. It was, he really, really believed, this is very forward thinking at the time, we're in the late 1880s, he thought this should be up in a mountain somewhere. And he actually corresponded with some astronomers at Lick Observatory without knowledge of his boss. But anyway, Crossley, he decided to get rid of the scope after about 10 years or so. And he wanted to sell it to Lick Observatory, which had no money. So he decided to give it to them, because nobody else wanted it. So Lick Observatory, Mount Hamilton, California, quite a trip for this telescope. So in the 1890s, there's a view of what Lick Observatory might have been like. It had the famous 36-inch telescope, which was completed, I think, in 1888. Turns out that before this was built, the Lick Observatory staff had a choice. You want a refractor, long focal length refractor, or how about a reflector, shorter focal length photographic reflector. And they opted to be conservative, and they ordered the 36-inch refractor telescope. So the director at the time that Crossley was trying to get rid of this 36-inch telescope, not a popular fellow, but he saw an opportunity. Okay, well, he did not get along with the staff members and eventually had to resign, but he was really eager to get his hands on this reflector telescope. And he found the funds to ship it. He found the funds to mount it, haul it up the mountain and all. And there is the dome. That's where the telescope really belonged, all the time. The telescope wasn't a big hit at first. I told you about some of its deficiencies. So the staff had their own opinions about the Crossley reflector. No good old junk. Edward Emerson Barnard, who himself was into photography, but he didn't think it could really be used. And so if that wasn't enough, he said, I wouldn't pay more than $5 for it. Well, they got it for free, so. A monstrosity, somebody else who remained anonymous, antiquated as Noah's Ark. And the one I like, the eyepiece is so high up, the dome should be filled with water so astronomers can observe from a boat. So clearly this telescope was doomed to fail. Nobody wanted to tackle it. Until Holden resigned and James Keeler took over. Keeler had been a Lick Observatory staff member back in the late 1880s, and he went to work at Allegheny Observatory, and they lured him back, in part with this telescope. So he was one of the early astrophysicists. So he had his training overseas, or Johns Hopkins, but then he went to Heidelberg and Berlin to learn physics. He was, by every measure, brilliant physicist. And he also had skill with mechanical things. And he took it as his personal project to whip that 36-inch telescope into shape, because he knew what it was capable of doing. The mirror was great. The mirror was great. It was all the rest of the stuff that hindered the use of that telescope. So he spent about a year's time after he arrived there refurbishing the telescope, improving the clock drive, swapping in better pieces, and aligning it more accurately. He admitted at the end, this is not a telescope that one person can operate. And he said that the biggest deficiency in the early years was there wasn't an assistant. Once they found the money to hire an observatory assistant, things proceeded really well. So Keeler would be up at the camera. He built a brand new camera mount, and he would shout directions to the assistant to turn this knob, nudge this thing. Basically, the assistant was just crawling all over the mounting while Keeler was trying to keep the telescope, the camera, focused on a particular object. And this was the result. 1898, I mean, sure, it doesn't look great by modern standards, but by 1898, 40-minute exposure, again, not continuously, but it could be done. And when astronomers saw this, professional astronomers, they really started to wonder, gee, maybe I should get a camera too. Just to compare the two, so 1883, Common from West London, and what was it, 1898 or something, mile high up on Mount Lick Observatory. just to jump ahead a little bit, I mean, you know where this whole story goes, but same telescope in 1928, okay, photographic emulsions got a lot better, but you can really see where things are headed here with photography. Of course, at the time, not everybody was convinced of this. I have to point out that professional astronomers really got into the photography game and the spectroscopy game late. Amateur astronomers were working on cameras, spectroscopes already for several decades to perfect the technology. And when the amateurs started discovering things, that's when the professionals started to crowd in. Just around 1895, one after the other, these observatories, institutional observatories, started purchasing cameras and were interested in reflector telescopes. So Keeler went on to take a whole series of photographs with the 36-inch. Here's M51 again. 4-hour exposure. Just imagine the work it took to complete such a long time exposure. Okay, 3-hour exposure, edge-on galaxy. They're enough that you can see the dust lane. Trifid Nebula. Yeah, stars are a little bloated. It does look a little bit out of focus, but 1899, 3 hours. The Crab Nebula, 2-hour exposure. And 13. Well, look who thought that these were great. Edward Barnard, who thought that telescope was a piece of junk, says, these very beautiful nebula photographs are really the finest that have ever been made. And he was won over to the reflector telescope side. Now, these pictures like this, we tend to focus on this wonderful hive of stars. But when Keeler inspected the negatives closely, in the seeming blackness, he saw little nebulae. Many thousands of unrecorded nebulae exist in the sky. A conservative estimate places the number within reach of the Crossley reflector at about 120,000. Most of these nebulae have a spiral structure. And sadly, Keeler's work was interrupted, tragically. So, Lick Observatory astronomer during the centenary of the 36-inch said, and there are other historians who agree with this sentiment, that Keeler's epoch-making work with the Crossley telescope was probably more influential than any other single factor in convincing professional astronomers of the practical effectiveness of large reflectors. So, the legacy of the Crossley telescope, the so-called best-worst telescope, showed the value of large aperture mountaintop reflectors. And within 20 years, we see first light of the 100-inch reflector on Mount Wilson. Validation of the camera as an essential astronomical tool. And then the ubiquity of spiral nebulae. So many of them. And the implications for our understanding of the universe. So just to show a more modern image, essentially this is what Keeler's photograph was implying. Now, we didn't know what these spiral nebulae are. In 1899, they had no idea whether they were within the Milky Way or outside the Milky Way. But they were so numerous, they couldn't be ignored. They had to be studied. So I would say that if there was a Hall of Fame for telescopes, this Crossley reflector would definitely get my nod. Thank you. Okay. Before we turn on the lights, I'm going to anticipate somebody's question. So what happened to it? Okay, so there's the original. In 1905, the astronomer Orion redesigned the whole mounting system. Mirror was the same. 1962, it completely changed. The mirror. I looked as carefully as I could at various sources. I spoke to some people at Lick. There's no record of that original mirror being removed from the telescope. So it may be that this original 1879 mirror remains in that telescope. Something that might be interesting to actually confirm. Or not. Okay, so I guess now we can have the lights.
Yes, very dangerous.
Yeah. Still being used?
Long draw.
Is it still being used? It was still being used certainly in the through the 1960s into the 70s, and I believe occasionally after that. As far as I know, it is not really a very active telescope. It is, but there may be more information.
The Anti-Telescope Society was there. We were trying to figure out exactly the date. And the bill, it's basically fallen into disrepair.
Yeah. Did you take a peek at the mirror?
Yes, because there was a hatch open.
Yeah.
And the top was uncovered. And just stuff was allowed to, fall on the mirror. And I may have pictures.
I know I do, but part of the problem was it was dangerous to use at night.
Yes.
Because it's a tremendous drop. I mean, it's that ladder, that railing is not very high. It's not very helpful.
Yeah.
In the dark, it's about 20 feet down, and you hit various, riveted steel and iron.
I get the picture.
Yeah, it's.
So John Briggs said that the glass, if it was original, would have had like a greenish.
Yeah.
Well, because it's a mirror, it doesn't have to be optical quality.
Right, but I mean, compared to a newer mirror like.
And if it had been a plate glass mirror, then it would have had a greenish tint from the iron.
And certainly the 60-inch and 100-inch are very green.
Yeah.
So I think that one, I can't remember for sure if it was, if I got a view of the bottom of it. I think I did, but memory is, a little iffy sometimes, so I don't want to say something I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, nor do I. That's why I have the question mark here. It turns out that there were two 36-inch mirrors. You had to resilver this thing after a few months, and so he would swap in and out the A and the B mirror. The A mirror is the famous mirror with which he took Andrew Common took his Orion Nebula photo. When those two mirrors went to Lick, the B mirror was refigured by the Grubb Corporation and incorporated into this telescope, the Crossley telescope. The A mirror, they tried to carve a hole to turn it into a Cassegrain, and so that's
That hurt, like, Mary. That hurt.
Yeah, it is said that, and famous astronomer said that in order to use the Lick 120-inch, you could either, take several weeks of courses and instruction, or a few nights on that thing, and you're certified. Because if you can get this thing to work, you can get even the Lick 120. Yes?
Between some of the earlier images and the later images, is any of the quality improvement due to using better photosensitive emulsions?
Yeah. The turning point, you might say, was in the late 1870s, early 1880s with the dry emulsions. The previous gelatin emulsions had to be wet in order to remain photosensitive, so it limited exposures to about 15 minutes. With these dry emulsions, you could prepare the plates ahead of time, and the companies popped up to actually prepare these plates for astronomical use. And there were incremental improvements, like even in the 20 years between 1880 and 1900 and beyond.
They were always silver halide-based emulsions, I suppose.
Yeah, I think through the 1800s. Yeah, I don't know when they started.
Well, it was all silver. I mean, it wasn't until digital came along.
Yeah.
The Lick Observatory published a volume of Keeler photos taken with the telescope.
Yeah.
And they're quite good photos.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at the copy in the library. I mean, if you want one, I saw one on the web for $1,750.
I didn't want to know that, 'cause I have one.
I think you can also download the image or facsimile of it, which is just thrilling to look at, given the sort of the eye on the history of the whole thing.
The reason that's on the web at that price is no one bought it. So that's something to also consider.
Yeah. So what, a mere 1,500 maybe.
Okay, Alan, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Parallax and Starlight Detectives. I don't know where we want to set up. If we could set maybe at that table, or do you have a preference?
It's probably better over here.
Okay, so if you have any further questions, but have a safe trip back, and thank you for coming, and this meeting is now adjourned.